It's Inappropriate Characters.
Hello, everyone. This is the RPG Pundit in a disembodied voice, speaking to you as the final boss of internet shitlords. And I'm here with my co-hosts, James Grim Jim Desveros and Venger Satanis, the most vanilla high priest of Cthulhu you'll ever see.
My wife is the first you call me Derek. That's how vanilla I am.
All right. Well, there you go, Derek. This is the first episode of Inappropriate Characters, and we named it that. We all had quite a lot of time talking about the what we were going to call our little show, and I think Inappropriate Characters is perfect because it's a play on words. It has multiple levels, right? The three of us are all people that certain people inside the RPG hobby consider to be inappropriate characters. And we're talking about inappropriate things on this show, things that are not meant to be discussed. Sometimes we're just going to review books or have guests or things like that. Don't expect that this is going to always be controversy, but we're probably always going to be talking about something a little controversial. Now, in case you don't know who we are, my name's the RPG Pundit, creator of Lion and Dragon, and several other interesting RPGs. I was also one of the major consultants, even though certain people wish I wasn't, on the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons, what's that?
You're on the wrong show, man. let me explain. It's nothing like Alpha Blue. That's a role-playing game. It's a role-playing game very different from any of the ones that you've written.
I'll Google it. How about
that? So I was started out, I guess, in the hobby as a blogger. I gained some renown as a blogger until at one point I wrote a blog criticizing the failure of a website called the RPG site. The owner of the site challenged me. He said, "Hey, I bet you couldn't do any better." And so he gave me the ownership. I said, "Challenge accepted." And 6 months later, it was one of the biggest RPG discussion forums on the internet. So that's www.therepgsite.com. I'm sure the link will be somewhere. That's true? Then I went on to start writing books.
I didn't know.
Arrows of India, Lords of Olympus, the Dark Albion setting, Lion and Dragon, and 5th edition D&D was something I contributed to, among other games that I've been a consultant with. So that's my brief biography. And now let's hear from James because he's spoken the least so far.
I'm too English, too polite to interrupt you, filthy colonials. Everyone calls me Grim. I've written a lot of things for a lot of different companies, though of late I have been kind of persona non grata, so mostly concentrating on self-publishing. My most recent big release was an RPG based on John Norman's Gore, which, as you can probably guess, put the cat amongst the pigeons a bit. My first breakthrough thing really was the Munchkin's Guide to Power Gaming, which I co-wrote with Steve Mortimer, and which kind of kicked off the whole Munchkin phenomenon, of which I see no money.
I didn't know that either. I'm learning so much about you guys.
Yeah. Oh, there we go.
All right.
I'm learning that James likes to use some very, very British expressions. We'll have to translate for the American here.
Google Translate needs to happen.
So what about you then, Venger?
Well, I've been gaming since I was like 10 years old. And back in something like 2005, I wrote what many consider to be the worst role-playing game ever, Empire of Satanis. And it was so bad that I took Satanis and then Venger from the D&D cartoon and then put it together. That became my role-playing game name online. And then I started writing some decent stuff after that. I took a page from Grimm's book of his Machinations of the Space Princess, and I cobbled together Alpha Blue, which is similar but different, and other games like Crimson Dragon Slayer and a bunch of other ones. And I'm kind of on the OSR fringes, meaning that I like the old school Renaissance and where everything came from and where everything is going in that sort of, traditional gaming genre or milieu. And, but I'm not one of those fundamentalists that feels like everything has to be like it was in 1977 or 1981 or whatever. I like to branch out and I like to do new things, but I also like to keep it real, go back to the roots, remember the foundation of role playing and gaming. That's it for now.
Venger actually wrote the Island of Purple Haunted Putrescence, which is an excellent OSR book. And then he proceeded to write a number of books that aren't really OSR books, but he says they are. But this is into something that I thought should be pointed out about the three of us that I think is going to be very interesting, is that we're all very similar in one important respect, which is that we've all been targets of what you could call the controlling left-wing totalitarian consensus, right? They've all tried to censor us at some point or another. I think Grim wins the prize for most censored out of the three of us.
A badge I shall wear proudly.
But besides that, we also all have some weird differences, similarities and differences, right? Venger and I are both people who practice occultism in some form or another, right? Whereas I'm a very conventional occultist. He thinks Cthulhu is real, right? And on the other hand, Grim, you're an atheist, a pretty well-known atheist, actually. Like, you're probably more famous in skeptic circles than you are in gaming circles, maybe.
Sometimes. I think I've done more in the gaming space than the atheist space, other than argue with people, really. But that's kind of what it's about.
That's all anyone ever does in the atheist space, is argue with people. That's the whole point of being an atheist, right?
Yeah.
I'm glad you admitted it. All right. So other than that, like the two of you, I think both identify as liberal. Why, I have no idea, right? But I know I have a running bet with Venger over whether or not Trump is going to get reelected. And I know that you were, I don't know if you're a Laborite or not, Grim, but I think that you would definitely identify on the left side of the spectrum, right?
Yeah, definitely, and pretty far left. Really, I'm not exactly a Laborite, but my views aren't really present in any of the political parties, and the way our political system works is screwed. So it's kind of by the by, really.
Are you like a spiked.com style Marxist, like a Marxist that believes in kind of anarcho-Marxism?
I wouldn't say I'm a Marxist. I would say I'm a left anarchist. Okay. There's things I agree with Spiked on. There's things I disagree with them on, like Europe. So,
right.
I'm all over the map.
And Venger, do you want to share with the audience in what particular way you threw away your vote in 2016? Or did you vote for Hillary or for Jill Stein?
I did. I thought she was far and away the better of the two candidates.
All right. So the only one of the three of us could have voted for Trump here, and you didn't. But,
I was going to win too. Just like a lot of people in America and maybe the rest of the world, I don't really pay attention to the rest of the world a lot. I'm mostly focused on America, like most Americans. Sorry. But yeah, I assumed Hillary was going to win, and just like almost everybody else did. And I'm more of a moderate, though. And so, yeah, I do lean a little bit towards the left, but ultimately, I would consider myself a moderate, and I prefer the middle more than either spectrum.
Okay, so you're kind of moderate left, and Jim says he's fairly left, and I'm probably the most famous Trump supporter in the RPG hobby, but I am a cultural libertarian. I'm not one of these weirdos from the alt-right or a religious fundamentalist. But that brings us to a place.
You and there's Kanye West.
Yeah, I'm a Kanye West libertarian. Exactly. He's my man. Absolutely. So this ties us back, though, that one thing that we do all have in common is our strong vocal support for free speech and our opposition to censorship, right? Anyways, it's going to be interesting to see how these different worldviews might or might not end up influencing our conversations on here. It's just it's going to be an unusual ride, I think. So
I think
let's get down.
I think it's kind of telling that three such different people in a lot of ways have all had similar kinds of problems.
Yeah, you're right. It absolutely is, because it demonstrates how tiny the permitted, allowed worldview of the people that want to be in charge of not just the hobby, but our entire culture, everything in our civilization, what they think should be allowed and what should not be allowed, and to the lengths to which they'll go to oppose that which they think should not be allowed, to want it to disappear,
I think that's a 21st century thing more than I think it's rooted in politics. It's just so much openness, and like everybody's like, oh yeah, participate and communicate and share everything and live online and all that other stuff. It just begs, if not requires, people to cast their vote on what should be in and what should be out and what's fashionable and what people consider intolerable. And the participation is great, but then it's like it forces normal people to condemn certain things or to like certain things, and then you get the lunatic fringe that like takes that to the 10th power and just like throws the baby out with the bathwater.
You're getting a bit of reverb in your sound there. I don't know if that can be fixed, but you know what? You're right. I wasn't expecting us to get into this meta level of conversation, but as a historian, I love saying that. My point of view is that I think that our society, our whole society, is trying to adjust to a level of technology that it wasn't prepared for, right? I think especially the internet it stands to be the most transformative new technology since at least the printing press. And I might argue since the invention of the written word to begin with, right? Because it changes everything about not just, what porn we watch or something like that, right? But in terms of how we communicate and how we define even our place, right? Because there's a lot of times when you're writing with someone on the internet, you're having a debate with someone by typing, and you say something like, oh yeah, but I heard you say such and such, when you've never heard this person say anything in your entire life, because what they're doing is writing, but you're starting to think of it as though you're having a conversation, right? And you end up identifying as like, not by the place you are, not by the people you belong to, not by your family or by your neighborhood. You might identify as, a My Little Pony fan, right? And that's your tribe, right? So what we've got is a situation where all the old definitions have kind of disappeared, and there's this creation of a new kind of tribalism. And I think that there's this underlying, to be a little bit maybe Jordan Petersonian here, there's an underlying terror that a lot of people feel at the kind of unraveling of those limits of those definitions. The internet, by liberating us in terms of the information we can get to, in terms of the knowledge, the things that we have access to, in terms of the level of exposure that we all have, has also brought out in a large part of the population a level of a disgust reaction, level of prudity, right, of puritanism that they might not otherwise have had. And it's very strange to see how that phenomenon has taken place and who it's taken place with, right? Because, I mean, if you had told me 20 years ago that the people trying to, going to the UN and begging to censor the internet would be people that were on the left, and that the right wing would be the great shitlords of the internet that would be using it as a tool to spread information that they otherwise couldn't. I would think you were nuts. I think you have to have it backwards, right? Because I would never have imagined that the great censorship movement of the 21st century would be coming not from, the religious right or something like that, but from feminist university professors,
Well, think how bewildering it is for someone who is on the left to see this happen amongst your own tribe. It's really unsettling.
I was
Would it be the right instead? Like if there was a vacuum and the left was like, yes, freedom of speech and communication and all lines open and everybody can do whatever they want. Would
it's
the
an
right,
interest
before,
like step in and be like, no, like, things have to be off limits and things have to be shielded from, the bad stuff. I mean, someone's going to do it. Someone's going to step in and be the jerk that information and entertainment and whatever from these people over here for, their own benefit or whatever excuse or rationalization there is. There's always going to be someone. I mean,
I think
maybe they'll switch places. It is surprising. I don't really think it's necessarily a political thing. It's become that maybe, but I don't think it's rooted in that. I think it's just it had to be someone, and then maybe the left are just more outspoken.
Well, let me put it this way.
I don't know.
If the internet, the full-blown internet, right, like the early 2000s internet, had somehow happened 15 years earlier, and it happened in 1985, then I'm absolutely sure that the guys pushing for hard-scale censorship would have been the right. Like what happened is a combination of this sudden new technology and this really unexpected set of, a whole set of different historical details, right? The first was that right around the time the internet exploded was also the time when the right was in a point of massive conflict, internal conflict, that saw a diminishing of the influence of the religious right wing. This is in the United States, right? And also like this in all of the, including in Europe, in all of the Western world, this kind of anti-establishment movement that was gaining ground slowly but steadily on the right. Whereas the left was in the opposite. It was in this kind of consolidating state. And you saw like the people who are worried about the freedom of the internet and want to censor culture and want to censor everything are going to be whoever is in control of the culture at the time. And the left had worked its way up over the course of the, from the 60s when they had very little power in the mainstream to becoming more and more of the mainstream, to having more and more influence over things like network news, television, the film industry, academia, all these areas that they got to direct how the messages were delivered. And as soon as you get suddenly this ultimate free communication system, the people who are in charge of how the message is delivered, if it had been the right wing, it would have been the right wing that would have been opposed to this, right? But because it was this group of people that had been gradually gaining more of the cultural battleground, you could say, all through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, suddenly they're the ones who see their establishment threatened, right? Their ability to control the message, the narrative, which for the left is a bigger deal than the right, because the left defines itself more by narratives than the right does.
Yeah, and they still think of themselves as being the underdog. They still think of themselves as being the rebel. And often I find in arguments with other people on the left, they don't understand the sheer amount of social and political power and media power and academic power that they wield. They still think they're rebelling.
Yeah, they absolutely do.
I was going to use the same word, the underdog, just like Grim did. The underdog is usually the one that wants the most freedom, because that will help set them free and hopefully allow them to rise to power, or at least even the playing field.
This does relate to a couple of our topics for tonight, really, doesn't it?
It really does, because it's going to be very interesting, actually. But let's start with the mildest one, right? So Grim, you have some information for us about Barsoom. Tell us, first of all, what that is, and then why it's interesting.
So, Barsoom is the word for Mars in Edgar Rice Burroughs' planetary romance, they call them, novels. It's kind of science fantasy, high adventure, written in the early part of the previous century for the most part. Half of them are in public domain and half of them aren't, which is why nobody's really done a game for it up until now. There's been knockoffs like Mars and a couple of others. I think one of the earliest TSR games was a war game set on Barsoom that they just did without permission and ended up having to have it withdrawn. But Modiphius managed to get the license from ERB Inc., which is the kind of legacy company that looks after all Edgar Rice Burroughs' other works. He's the same guy who invented Tarzan. And they've produced a game, and it looks very slick and everything. It doesn't quite feel right to me, but then I think they're being really controlling over the license. They're notorious for it. And after the film, which I thought was great, didn't do that well. I think they're being particularly cautious. But Modiphius just sent out their backer questionnaire, so they're obviously moving towards fulfillments. They've got miniatures and playmats and GM screens and dice and all the other paraphernalia you could want. So I think we can be expecting the books reasonably soon.
Now, are you a backer?
I am a backer because I'm a huge Barsoom fan, and if anyone was doing it, pretty much I would have backed it. So I'm a sucker.
And you said it wasn't exactly right to you. What do you mean by that?
So it's that they're pulp novels. So what they describe is very much high adventure, and while there's no kind of detail to it or anything, the world of Mars in these books is a place where everybody runs around naked all the time, and heroes are rescuing princesses. And so I can understand to an extent why they might feel that would need to be modernized. But, to me, Mars equals nakedness, not in any kind of prurient way. It's just that, that was something radical and liberating at the time it was written, and also kind of exotic and a way to sell books and for pulp magazines to have, risque things on their covers and so on. And so sanitizing it, I think, is a bit...
So wait, how far is the sanitizing gone? Is it just a question of the art in the book, or do have they tried to change the actual pulp kind of context of what Barsoom is like?
A little of both, I think. I mean, I don't think there's any nudity in the art, at least not in the previews and so on that I've seen, which I guess I can understand that, they want the widest possible audience and so on, same as the film did. So the film had none of that in it. It was aimed at a lower rating. As far as the sort of pulp context and so on goes, I mean, the books are very much, the strong hero rescues the woman, and while the women of Mars are fierce and capable in and of themselves, that was much more of an emphasized thing in the books, and that will have been taken away and altered to make the women more equally heroic to the men in that way. So I think that will have been changed. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing considering the modern audience and so on, but I always have misgivings when someone produces a work that's derived from historical fiction or set in history, that when they change the context in which that game was written, I think you lose something. You lose a perspective on the past. You lose an authenticity to the material. That's something I've tried to avoid when I've done licensed works, which is imposing, my view on the licensed work. I try to avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah, for sure. Now, this is very interesting. I thought that this was probably going to be the least controversial subject for out of the three that we're going to be talking about today. But are you two familiar with the pulp rev movement?
Yes, I know a few people from that.
No, I don't know what that is.
All right, Ben, do you know, there's a guy on G Plus who's probably the chief advocate of the pulp rev movement named Jethro Johnson. And he's the one who wrote a book about Appendix N, but it's not an RPG book. Appendix N, for anyone who doesn't know, is the appendix in the original Dungeon Master's Guide that has the list of recommended reading. And he kind of analyzed these books as in as much as, you know, how they might have inspired the spirit of D&D or what have you. Now, the thing about this movement is that it is kind of like this ultra reactionary. I don't want to use that not necessarily the worst sort of sense, but they're very much like, think about the worst old schooler, the guy that says any RPG book after 1978 is garbage, right? Well, they kind of think that, like, the guys that think that Isaac Asimov in the 1940s screwed up science fiction, right? And that everything after him was different degrees, for the most part, different degrees of crap, right? And I know for a fact that Jethro, he considers Burroughs and the Mars saga that Burroughs wrote to be like an example of like, I think he can come into the comments and correct me if he's wrong. Maybe we'll even interview him sometime. But I think he considers it like almost the paragon of what pulp should be, right? And what is his example of the ideal sort of science fantasy adventure, right? And the interesting part of this is that it's very politically tied up too, that these guys, they're most of the people that are interested in the pulp rev movement tend to be very conservative and very socially conservative, to the point that I get into fights with a lot of them on social media on a very regular basis because of, you know, differences of ideological opinion, right? Where some of them think, you know, for example, that the Enlightenment, the Age of Enlightenment was just a big mistake, right? And that democracy doesn't work, right? And stuff like that, right? And they also think, you know, that, you know, science fiction of the 70s was all almost uniformly, you know, degenerate or something like that, right? So I'm thinking, do these guys know what they're doing? What Modiphius, they must know what Modiphius is doing with Barsoom, and you know what their reaction to this is going to be. And I wonder when it finally comes out, you know, whatever the final product is of the Barsoom game. I expect that we'll hear news about this, at least in social media channels, from that kind of social reactionary right wing of the gaming hobby, saying that this is just another example of an appalling, you know, destruction of something they consider almost a sacred cow, right?
Yeah,
degeneracy.
Degeneracy is just the right wing term for problematic. It means the same thing.
Yeah, well, this is another thing that the three of us have in common. We're all libertines, right? I mean, to different degrees. Now, I'm willing to accept that there are certain things that maybe are not appropriate in certain contexts, right? And certainly one difference between the three of us is that both of you have written RPGs that have, or other, you know, gaming products that have some fairly salacious content, whereas everything I've written, curiously, has been pretty much at most PG rated, right? Maybe R rated for violence, but I don't know if I've ever had even I've never had a naked woman on the cover, right? I'm not James Raggy, right? I've never had a naked woman, I think, anywhere in any of my books, right? And my RPG content in terms of the system or the setting, while, you know, might mention sex from time to time, does not tend to have the same focus on that as a subject that I return to in the way that the two of you have had in various different products. I'm wondering why that is, but maybe that would end up being a whole topic in and of itself, you know.
I think that would be one for another time. So
we'll have to do at some point a just how sexy should RPGs be episode.
The too long didn't read version is I like women.
Yeah, I like women too. I don't need them in my D&D books, you know. shit. Now you know that somebody's going to just take a clip of that out of context and say, look, that proves that the RPG doesn't want women to play D&D.
Yeah.
Which is not what I meant, for the record. Okay. So maybe we should move on. Now that we're on the subject of women, apparently there have been some women being seriously harassed in the RPG hobby. And surprise, surprise, the harasser turned out to, well, the alleged harasser, let's be fair here, right? Turned out to be... Sorry?
He admitted some of it. Like
yeah, he did.
Pieces, or...
He now semi-admitted harasser.
Came out and was like, you know what? It's pretty much all true. I mean, that's the gist I got. He's like, you know what? It's you might
let's
as well
explain who it is first here. So this is a guy named Sean Patrick Fannon, right? Who he's not one of us, right? He's not one of the terrible, oh my God, alt-right Nazis that the left wing accuses all of us of being from time to time, right? He's actually one of the big advocates, or was one of the big advocates for a long time, of censoring the hobby. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm sure that he signed up in some case or another to back by being blackballed or blacklisted or censored or whatever. But he pretty much directly went against you, Venger. Like and I'm not sure if he didn't also do that against you, Jim, right? At different moments, trying to get products of yours pulled from RPG Now and things like that.
Yeah, it's not clear how involved he was, but he was definitely a fan when I was having products pulled.
And you, Venger?
Yeah, I
wrote. You did a blog about this, right?
Yeah, I quoted him on my blog, Venger's Old School Gaming blog. Of all the shitty things he said about Alpha Blue, when that got temporarily pulled from the shelves of Drive-Thru RPG, it got blacklisted for 2 or 3 days until it could be reviewed, and then it was whitelisted, which means it was deemed A-OK. Yeah, he compared it to selling manure in a cupcake shop or ice cream parlor or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, he was just going on and on about how horrible it was and how it had no place, and really condemning the exploitation and grindhouse sleaze factor, which of course is now ironic because in Alpha Blue you play a character that might be sleazy or might harass someone, or be a little too forward with looking down a girl's shirt or making grunting noises, whatever. But he was doing it for real, and he was condemning people that want to do that in their pretend world, role playing. And he's doing it in real life. And now that he's being condemned, he's just like, oh, sorry, my bad, or I don't know. I don't even know what his reaction is. Just like, I think he's gone. I mean, it seems like he's just like, he left the role-playing game world, and it's probably gonna be a little while before he comes back. I mean, I don't know if anyone's seen him or he's.
So far as I know, he's lost things like his Spotlight blog on EN World, but he's still working on the rules for Savage Rifts. How that's going to end up working out, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of the last thing that Palladium needs at the moment is this kind of fuss around them.
It is kind of funny, isn't it? That, I mean, we're seeing this all over. It's a larger cultural phenomenon, right? With the Me Too movement. That, however, whatever you want to say about it, right? There certainly has been some bad behavior that has been exposed. Maybe there have been some cases where the allegations were unfair or what have you, but there's certainly been a lot of cases where the allegations were fair. And a surprising number of this were of men who were going out of their way to talk about how wonderfully feminist they were and to condemn the sexism in society and all of this sort of thing. These guys that had one discourse and then in in their own private lives were being absolute sleazeballs, right? And before you got on to Venger, Jim and I were talking a little bit, because Venger got on a little bit later when we were prepping for the show. And I commented to Jim that it was kind of funny that of the three of us, you are by far the one that has kind of the most vanilla sort of life, right? You got a wife and what is it, 2 kids, right? What? 5?
5 kids. Yeah.
You're kidding. Holy crap. All right. So you're almost like, you could be, if you were in the traditionalist right, you'd be a hero, right? You're helping to preserve the American people there. That is hilarious. But will it be fair? Will you say right now, as a statement to the world, that you are not a person likely to be exposed tomorrow as having serially harassed women, right? Because you are happily married, am I right? And
right.
I'm guessing that you don't go around doing those sorts of things, right?
Not anymore.
You know, I think it was Chesterton that said that you should always be worried about people with no apparent vices, right? That they're the ones that have the real problems. As you can see, this is my first pipe. I was formerly smoking Lorenzetti egg with Country Doctor. Now I'm currently smoking a Raleigh Hawkbill with Image Virginia. I'm a sexual libertine. I'm a coffee addict. I spent almost my entire university education, pre and postgraduate, on almost every kind of drug imaginable. So I'm never one to judge anyone.
Put that in your pipe.
Whatever their habits are, right? But there's something about the prude is that I think that one of the reasons why they want to censor these things in public is because they don't like the idea of other people having more fun than they do. But another reason is because a lot of times they're deflecting, right? They're trying to cover up for their own inner peccadillos. And there's a guy on YouTube called Diversity in Comics that point out, it's not a surprise really that feminists think that all men are sexual harassers, because all the male feminists are being accused of sexual harassment now. So they're obviously the feminists are constantly surrounded by sexual harassers. They're basing their opinion on the people that hang out with them.
It's a trope at this point. It really is. I mean, it has been before, I suppose. I mean, you can look at the kind of fire and brimstone Baptist preachers who are then found in the men's restroom, snorting meth off a rent boy. That happens often enough, and all the while they're preaching from the pulpit about how terrible homosexuality is. And I mean, Gamergate is keeping a running sort of tally and update of all the people who criticized Gamergate as being misogynistic, who've been outed as rapists and child molesters and God knows what else. It's like reset the clock every day, or it seems like sometimes. And Sean was definitely like that. He was combative, completely intolerant of other points of view. He blocked me from everything ages ago, and criticized a whole bunch of stuff that I did. And then it turns out he's doing this. All the things he accuses other people of. It seems to me that you're far safer in the hands of an out and proud pervert than you are around a supposedly devout male feminist,
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing. Sorry, were you going to say something, Venger?
Just wanted to say true dat.
Indeed. Now, the interesting thing to me, though, is that this really exploded when another guy on N-World, Christopher Helton, did an expose, you could say, of Sean Patrick Fannon, right? And this other guy is also a pro-censorship type of guy. He's also one of these kind of prudes of the hobby. So it's kind of a case of the social justice warrior. I hate that term, but the control left eating itself right now. And I'm watching all this, and just eating popcorn. I'm enjoying myself seeing these guys going at each other, which is, in a sense, it gives you a glimmer of hope to see them devouring each other. On the other hand, that what this is that they're a purity culture, and purity cultures require periodic purity purges where they become even more extreme. So they're culling the herd of people that aren't extreme enough to them, right?
Yeah, I tried to comment in my most diplomatic and reasonable tone of voice on the EN World thread, and immediately got banned from commenting any further because I used the term social justice warrior in scare quotes and virtue signaling in scare quotes, and that's verboten. So I can't even offer my perspective there.
You can't even say that in EN World. So if you say social justice warrior, they see that as some sort of political/personal attack. And they will threaten to ban you or just ban you.
Just the words themselves are like magic words that cause offense, right? So it's just not. Now, meanwhile, on the RPG site, we've got a thread that's over 20 pages long, getting about 1,000 views a day now. That is on this same subject, right? And we are not banning anyone there. I mean, we could. There are very few things you can get banned for on the RPG site. It does happen occasionally. But, saying words is not one of them unless you're doing them in a way that's meant to be intentionally disruptive on the site or posting something illegal or something like that, right? But the interesting thing is that on social media just recently, some people have pointed out that thread as an example of what's wrong with the hobby, or what's wrong with especially the OSR, which is associated with the RPG side, of course, the old school Renaissance, the old school gaming movement. And the people who did this, some of them are people that are ostensibly members of the OSR, right? So you see, James Raggy, who makes Lamentations of the Flame Princess, was a bit bothered when someone on that same thread talked about, somebody very conservative on that thread talked about how Lamentations is pornographic and degenerate or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And that's fine for him to point out how stupid that is, but he kind of didn't point out that most people on the thread also thought that statement was really stupid. And instead, a bunch of his fans and a bunch of other people in that kind of the social justice wing of the OSR, the wing of the social justice warrior movement that's trying to wind their way into the OSR, used that thread on Google Plus as a kind of weaponizing of saying, well, look, this is proof that everybody at the RPG site thinks this way because they're not censoring that guy, right? Why aren't they blocking him? He should be banned. And it's just ridiculous. So it's kind of nice to see these guys going at each other in the case of Helton and Sean Patrick Fannon, but it's also shown just how many people there are, even in an area as libertarian, you could call it culturally libertarian as the old school Renaissance, that are basically opposed to free speech, right?
Yeah, and they want to bring in these supposed anti-harassment policies into more and more conventions and events and stores and everything as well. And they're using this kind of thing as an excuse to push that.
The irony being that games like Lamentations of the Flame Princess, or anything that Zach Smith has written, that he's another one of these guys. Now, Zach's got a particular case, right? Is that he's desperate to be one of the cool kids, and he's never going to be because he did porn, right? And fundamentally, the social justice warrior left is infused with these kind of third wave feminist ideas that are anti-sex. So they're never going to accept him, but he keeps trying desperately to show his credentials, as a true social justice warrior, which has led him to basically disavow all of his former allies in the OSR and call us all, right-wing fanatics and fundamentalists and things like that. But his games are the first thing they would want to censor, right? And these guys don't seem to get that there's one of the big themes of the social justice warrior movement, as far as it's concerned with tabletop role playing, is the blocking out of anything that doesn't strictly fit the third wave feminist idea in the role playing hobby, in terms of art, in terms of game design, or anything else, right? To the point that one famous RPG feminist condemned Alina the cleric, the fully clothed, fully armored, head to toe armored cleric of the Menser Red Book D&D box set. You know, probably one of the coolest and most iconic female heroes of the early RPG era, as being a product of rape culture or something like that, right?
Yeah, there's a level of purity they aspire to that I just don't think is possible. It's a shame about Zach. I really like Zach and everything that he's contributed to gaming, but yeah, he stopped talking to me a couple of years ago, blocked me from everything because I was too much of a liability apparently to have around. It's a shame, and it's not like anyone's welcomed him with open arms.
No, he's never going to be accepted by these people, not ever. You know, as far as his games are concerned, from a kind of reviewer perspective, they always have magnificent art. I'll give him that. You know, if you like that style of art, and they always have some really interesting ideas in them. They also often have a lot of gimmicks and this kind of excessive desire to be edgy. You know, so it's hit and miss. But he has done some good product, some good work. But he's managed to burn bridges with pretty much everybody I know, everybody I consider worthwhile in the OSR, except maybe James Raggy, who keeps him on because he knows that Zach will always sell, right? Raggy's probably the ultimate OSR businessman. He's probably the most successful businessman in the OSR I can think of. And, you know, I get the impression that as long as he knows it's going to be a sound business deal, he'll keep backing the guy.
Yeah, well, I think it'd be nice if role-playing games and politics just like kept to their own sides. And I don't know why people have to mix stuff so much. I mean, if you want to talk about your views or get more involved or whatever in politics, that's fine. But to just shoehorn that into what you like or what you play or who you associate with or what kind of styles or movements you're a part of or you listen to or read blogs of, that just seems so stupid. I mean, and limiting and probably closed-minded. I mean, I don't really care what someone's politics are. If I like the games that they put out or I like their views on gaming, then I'll pay attention or I'll read them, or maybe I'll buy some of their books or something like that. But it's like so coming down to politics, like all the time. And it's just so stupid. Like, oh, you can't be friends with that person, or you can't like comment on that person's blog too much, or you can't show your face on this gaming forum, or, you know, if you side with this person, well, you're automatically against that person and what they believe. It's too much. I would prefer that people just games as they would and left politics out of it, like 95% of the time.
Well, that would be great, but let Uncle Pundit explain to you why that isn't going to happen, right? And first, let me preface with saying I totally agree, right? My point of view, like there was recently this controversy that was centering around me on Twitter, where people called me a gatekeeper for suggesting that people who don't play D&D aren't part of the D&D hobby, right? But my point that I reiterated there over and over again was that if you're a gamer, I don't care about anything else, right? If you play D&D, you're part of the D&D community. If you want to call it a community, I'd call it a hobby, right? But it doesn't matter what your political stripe is. It doesn't matter if you're male, female, if you're one of the other 50 genders, if you're gay, straight, whatever it is, right? Whatever your race, whatever your creed, whatever anything else, if you're coming to my table and you're there to play the game, then I don't care. And the proof of that is in my epic DCC campaign, right? Where I've got two guys that are to the right of me, and then I've got a Eurocentrist, social democrat guy, and then I've got a guy who's a literal like a literal Trotskyite, right? When he's not playing DCC, he is advocating for the most, radical, old school Marxist political movements here in South America, right? And none of us care. We all get along great because we're there to play DCC, right? And we have a great laugh, and it's extremely politically incorrect, but we're all having a good time, right? Now, the reason that on the bigger scale this can't happen is because of the fundamental nature of identity politics, right? Identity politics says that what you are is political, right? That you being a woman or a man is a political act, right? You being of a certain gender or a certain sexual preference is a political act. Your race is a political act, and that expands into meaning. If your identity is the core of your ideology, it means every single thing you do is an ideological act, right? How you play role-playing games, what music you listen to, right? Which is part of the whole issue with the Kanye West thing, right? Because a black man isn't, especially a black rapper, isn't supposed to like Trump. That's just not part of the deal, right? Black people aren't allowed to be Republicans, right? So there's this idea that every detail of identity is a political battleground if you're looking at it through that lens, right? So the identity politics people literally want a culture war. They need everything to be political, and this is something you see in other totalitarian societies, right? Where everything that you did had to be, in Soviet Russia, everything was about communism in some way, whether it was movies or whether it was music or whether it was TV, and it was the same thing, to Godwin things. It was the same thing in Nazi Germany, right? Because this is the essence of totalitarian movements, is this idea, totalitarians got to tote, right? They've got to be total. Everything you do, every waking hour has to be part of this kind of political identity and their political awareness of that identity. And that's why we've seen in the last few years this inroad into every element of popular culture, whether it's movies, comics, TV shows, and role-playing games, and of course video games. They're all part of the battleground for a certain group of people that demand that the whole thing be politicized.
So what about people like myself, like a lot of other people that just kind of, they recognize, yes, that's the way a lot of the world is, but they reject that. They want to opt out, not behave like that, not see themselves in that way, not see their hobby in that way. They just want to disassociate themselves from that whole ideology or movements or what have you.
Well, you're kind of screwed, aren't you? Because they won't let you.
What's that saying? You may not care about politics, but politics cares about you. So unfortunately, by setting yourself up as neutral and saying that you don't want this stuff in your space, you don't want it intruding in your games, they perceive that as attack. They see you as an enemy.
Right, because
ignore all that stuff. You
could ignore it in the sense that you could go in your own little group, right? You could be part of your own little group and play your own little game. And until the time comes when, if they have complete control over society and can break into your house and drag you away to a gulag or something, that would be a viable option, I guess, right? But it doesn't solve the bigger problem that you're going to see it all the time anyways. And it's going to change, for example, the products that are available to you, because the more inroads that they make, the more that they're going to get to control and limit and restrict the product that is potentially available to you. That they're going to restrict ways for people who are not part of their movement to monetize, right? Like, this is the difference between authoritarianism and totalitarianism, right? Authoritarianism says, we are doing things this way, and you cannot disagree with us about that, right? If you try to raise your head up and oppose us, we're going to smash you down, right? But totalitarianism says, we're doing things this way, and you must agree with us. If you don't agree with us, we're going to smash you down. And that's a very important difference, that this movement is totalitarian. It's not authoritarian. It sees any refusal to agree as an offensive act in and of itself. They don't allow you.
you've experienced some of this directly in the way that Sean Patrick Fannon came after Alpha Blue and so on. I'm sure you've had some, deliberate downvoting in reviews and so on. I mean, I had petitions trying to make it so people I'd freelanced for wouldn't employ me again. I get brigading. I get so many hateful comments you wouldn't believe. They will dog you basically just for disagreeing with them. It does happen. I would love it if you could just kind of leave them to it and step aside. And to an extent you can, because you can control your social media input. You can, you can filter your email and your whatever else. But when it comes to things like reviews and scores and so on, there's not a lot you can do to stop them trashing you. And it does, despite the best will in the world, make you occasionally think twice about what you're writing or what you want to do. Is it worth having to put up with all this bullshit? And sometimes, unfortunately, it isn't. And I hate it whenever I succumb to that self-censorship.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I do get some negativity and some hate here and there. Sometimes I try to use it to my advantage by focusing on it and pointing out how stupid it is, or ignorant, or kind of hypocrisy these people are peddling. And then other times I just ignore it and hope it goes away. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, I kind of think that a lot of us need just sort of a perpetual sign of like, don't tread on me, just posted for everybody can see all the time. And that can be seen as a political statement. Like, don't try to squish my freedoms and censor me and trash things that you don't like or you don't understand just because they're not in your wheelhouse. And this will be kind of my closing statement because I gotta go. My wife is like,
Oh no! Well, we're gonna lose you for the last segment then.
So, but anyway, I would say to the listeners or the viewers out there, I definitely want to know what everybody else thinks about keeping, to some degree, politics out of gaming, if that's even possible, if that's a good idea, or if we should just throw in the towel and be like, okay, every time I'm gonna, post a blog or a forum post or something, I need to reiterate my political agenda or my identity and what political avenue that's coming from. And I gotta give a shout out to all the people that are like me. And I gotta say, fuck you to all the people that aren't like me. And, do we have to do that? Do we have to succumb to that? Like every time we log on to our computer? Or is there a point where we can just be like, I'm me and I like this stuff and I'm just going to go about my business and hang out and communicate and play games with the people that I like and that like me, and then that's it. So anyway, I'm out and I will see you guys soon, I hope. And don't forget to mention the Patreon, because that's the thing.
Please do let us know about the Patreon there, because here's the thing, before you go, that we're just a programming note, right? Right now we're going to be doing one of these shows per month, and then probably one or two, maybe if we can set them up, chats, live chats, super chats, whatever they're called, on YouTube, where all three of us or two of us will be there. I'm not sure. We'll see if we can work out the times, because we're all in different time zones, where we're going to kind of be, talking about stuff like this, maybe with other people. But the Patreon is the place to to support us, if you want to have more of these kind of shows, we're going to set up different levels of funding. And depending on how much funding we get, will determine how many shows we're going to be making, on a regular basis. So if you like this show so far, and we're not quite done yet, we're going to continue for one more segment here after Venger leaves, then back us up on the Patreon to get more of this. If you want to see more of this, if you think what we're talking about here is interesting and or important. I would also say, Venger, as far as what you said, don't tread on me in 2018 is an extremely politicized statement, unfortunately, right? Because we just had in London there this rally for free speech, right? Which had left-wing people at it, right-wing people at it. It had gay men at it. It had drag queens in it. It had all kinds of people. And what you saw throughout the establishment media was that it was called a far-right event. And why was it far right? Well, because it was advocating for free speech, right? And free speech has been incredibly, from my point of view, the left has abandoned the entire concept of free speech by declaring it a right-wing idea, right? That if you're in favor of free speech, you must be a right-winger because, free speech is dangerous and offensive, right? So saying, I want to just do my thing is inherently, in our modern era, a political statement, because it's been put as a political statement by the side of people who don't want to let you just do your thing.
That's sad. That's shitty and sad.
That's it.
Sums it up.
Yeah. So you guys enjoy the rest of the show, and yeah.
Night night.
We'll catch you next time. I'll note that. There we go. I'll note that Venger has to be, well, I mean, I know he's got a family, 5 kids, Jesus, right? But he's the one in the earliest time zone, right? It's 10:30 here, which means it's 2:30 in the morning where you are, and he's the one that has to run away. Jesus.
Yeah.
Anyway, so getting to our final topic of the night, in a way, the three of us have something that's kind of one lucky point in our favor, which is that I think we're all straight white men, right? I guess technically I'm Latino, but I look pretty well. And in the modern age, straight white men have the benefit that they're less required to agree than any minority group, right? Because if we don't agree, they're happy for us to be the bad guys, right? The ones that are the example of everything that's wrong, and so there's obviously a backlash against us, an attempt to censor us and things like that, but there isn't a kind of collective losing of their shit that you'll get if it's somebody who is, say, a person of color or a woman or someone who's LGBT, who doesn't follow the expectations of what the SJWs demand that they act, right? Or that they believe in, or that they say. And this segues into the final, news item of the evening, which is about Satine Phoenix, who has just been hired as, I think, the public relations person for Wizards of the Coast.
Community support or something.
There you go, community support, right. Now, Satine Phoenix better than I do, so maybe you could tell the viewers a little bit about her and why she's awesome.
She just is. She's relentlessly positive. She's always got loads of energy. She's always throwing herself into new projects. So I think she's the perfect person to do this. She's just overflowing with enthusiasm. She used to be part of Zach's little crew, the I Hit It With My Axe, the D&D with Porn Stars group. She left that industry and moved into illustration and other things. She did some work for me on Machinations of the Space Princess, which I think was her first commercial hire in RPGs. So I've kind of seen...
It's a great RPG, by the way.
Thank you. So I've kind of seen her go through all of this and change and build in her career. She does live streamed games on Twitch. I think Sirens of the Realms is her current one. So yeah, it's been great to see her succeed so well, because she is just a really lovely person, and I can't think of anyone more deserving. Though I'm surprised they did give it to her.
Yes, yeah. Well, Satine Phoenix is a fantastic artist, for starters, right? And she's also clearly a huge enthusiast of role-playing games. So those are both very strong points in her favor. Besides that, though, she is, she was formerly involved in the porn industry. She's a big advocate of, sex-positive ideas, from what I know. And she's, I'm not sure if she'd define herself as LGBT or something like that. I don't want to label her without being sure, but she is a person of color, right? She's Filipina, I believe.
She's mixed. I think it's half Filipino. Yeah.
So in some ways, if you look at the basic outline of her identity, right, she fits all the right slots for what we've seen as recent hires by Wizards of the Coast in their desperate attempts to virtue signal diversity, right? But she doesn't fit in many other ways, which is, first of all, she is hugely sex positive, which is not something that feminists in the third wave are very fond of. And second, as far as I know, she's pretty much on the free speech side of the argument, right? Like, I mean, she worked for you. My first thought when I saw that she'd been hired by Wizards of the Coast was, my God, do they not know that she worked for Grim Jim? I'm amazed that there haven't been calls for Wizards to fire her on the basis of that alone, on the basis of just merely being associated with someone like you, right?
Yeah, I mean, that just goes to show how badly some people think of me, that I would be the issue that might get in her way. I hope not. There's still time for someone to kick up a stink, I suppose. But yeah, we're still friendly. She never cut me off. She's done a couple of other odd little pieces of art for me that will turn up in projects at some point. Yeah. She's got diversity in the one area where it actually counts, which is opinions from the rest of their hires. So yeah, it's good.
It is good. But my question is whether this is a good sign of Wizards not having completely drunk the Kool-Aid of the current SJW left, or does Wizards just not know? Are they about to get themselves into a huge shitstorm by virtue of someone pointing this out and then demanding that she either recant her heresies or be fired?
Well, yeah. I mean, they talked to you in the lead up to Fifth Ed. They talked to Zach, who's not exactly uncontroversial. Yeah,
they did. But that was, first of all, a slightly different era, because I mean, I know that sounds like, it doesn't sound like it was that long ago, right? But I worked for Wizards between 2012 and 2014, right?
Yeah.
And that was a time where Wizards was not yet as, how would you put it, as infiltrated, let's say, by the totalitarian left. And of course, right after the Player's Handbook was published, there was already this huge outcry. It was called Consultant Gate, right? It happened even before Gamergate, a few months before Gamergate even started, where there were these demands that Wizards of the Coast denounce us and promise that we'll be blacklisted forever. And I mean, neither I nor Zach, I think, have any intention, or we had no intention at the time, of ever working for Wizards again. For me, it was a dream come true to just say that I got to help make an edition of D&D. But I was never thinking of it in terms of working for them regularly, because I can't, my creativity would not fit well with the demands of a kind of a corporate job like that, where you have to do things within certain very strict frameworks, right? But there was this big outcry, and Wizards never denounced me or made any kind of public statement, which I think was a wise strategy on their part. First of all, because that would just, we know that apologizing just makes things worse, right? It just causes it's just blood in the water for these people. But beyond that, also because I think they know that I have hundreds of emails from that period between me and Mike Merles, and I know where all the bodies are buried, right? So, and that's why in this recent argument that happened on Twitter, I was asked of Wizards to denounce me, right? And Jeremy Crawford, who I never spoke to in my life because he wasn't involved in the part I was involved in 5th edition, he said something. He said something like, "Oh, I never saw any of RPG Pundit's work," right? Well, of course you didn't, Jeremy, because I was working directly with your boss. I was on a level above you. You were under me in that sense, not directly, in the sense that I was on a different realm of the totem pole than you were, right? Mike Merles saw hundreds of emails worth of my work, right? But Mike Merles himself, of course, even though he was repeatedly asked to, he didn't say a word. And, again, because the bodies are buried in my email archives, right?
Wizards may simply be too corporate in approach to acknowledge these kind of things in anything but the most basic of ways.
Yeah, well, let's hope so for Satine's sake. It'll be very interesting to see. I mean, I think the immediate reaction was overwhelmingly positive to her being hired, but I think that a lot of people just saw, this attractive alternative chick, right? And they said, "Oh, she's one of us," right? So great, this is perfect. Another diversity hire, that's fantastic. They probably didn't really, a lot of the people congratulating her don't even realize how talented she actually is. I'm not saying in any way that she really was a diversity hire. She's extremely qualified to do what they hired her to do. I want to make that clear, right? But I think a lot of the people that were gushing about her hire assume that she's just another one of the milkshake crew, right? Of these extremely feminist women that got hired because they had a blog about how horrible men are or something like that, right? But she's not that. She's not Anna Krieger or Tracy or Hurley or any of these people. She's someone very, very different. And I don't know. I would put my bet on the fact that sooner or later someone's going to complain about her, and then we're going to see what Wizards is really made of.
It's funny because Satine is what my image of a feminist would have been before everything went to shit. I guess she's strong, she's capable, she's professional, she's good at what she does, she's self-made. She's in command of her own sexuality, all of these things. That was what my internal concept of feminism was until about 2010, so. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I guess we'll see how it pans out. I wish her the best. I think it was a good choice by Wizards. We'll see if they have the spine to keep it up, right?
Yeah. Maybe Satine is the one thing all sides can agree on is a good thing.
Maybe so. I'm sure there'll be somebody that'll complain, but let's hope that it's ignored. All right. So I guess we've covered the major points for the evening, and with Venger gone, we probably shouldn't go on too much longer. I'll reiterate again that if anybody who's watching who liked this show, stay tuned because we'll schedule some kind of live chat at some point within the next month, at least 1 or 2 in the month, and we're going to be doing one show a month until, I hope, fairly soon when we get enough Patreon backers that we can justify, especially to Venger's wife, why we should be doing this on a more regular basis, right? So let's hope that works out. If you like the show, please support it. It's very important that if you want more of this sort of talk, if this is the type of show on role-playing games that you want to sit down and listen to or in the car or wherever you are, then you have to back it up, right? You have to be willing to act as a patron in our modern culture for the things that you like. Any closing statements from you?
That pretty much covers it as far as I'm concerned. I'll put links to our various bits and pieces in the show notes on the YouTube channel, so people will be able to find us elsewhere. And yeah, I'm sure they'll find something interesting.
All right, sounds great. I hope everyone enjoyed. Currently smoking Lorenzetti Volcano with Blue Boar. Take care, everyone.
Good night, all.